Today, we have with us Julie Barlow, author, journalist, and an expert on being self-employed. We will be speaking about her new book, Going Solo, Everything You Need to Start Your Business and Succeed as Your Own Boss. Julie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I've been reading your book. I think it's a manual to get started on this lonely and arduous uh, life as a solopreneur. But before we get there, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What qualifies you as an expert on being solo?
I guess because I've been solo all my professional life. I graduated from university at a time when it was very difficult to get a job in media or literature. You know, I graduated with an MA in English literature. So I decided just to strike out and, like many of us at the time, we freelanced sort of by necessity. And I started pitching magazine articles straight out of university and just got going. And, over the years, I guess being a self-employed person grew on me. I mean, I never ever was willing to give up what I get from being self-employed to take a job. And, I was tempted. We were all tempted at times, various times. But I guess what I got from being self-employed was the ability to have a lot of freedom, do everything I sort of wanted to do professionally and try new things all the time. So my career has gone from being a magazine journalist when I started out to being an author. I write in both English and French. And I move between the two media worlds and the two publishing worlds in English and French in France, in Quebec, and here. I work as a translator as well, from French to English. I've done radio documentary. I've written a script, started writing a script for a TV series based on one of my books. I do some teaching. What else? I think that's about, I ghostwriting, manuscript consultation, you name it. There's been lots of new challenges and new developments over the decades that have, allowed me to try a whole bunch of things and find sort of new markets for my skills, basically. So it's been almost 30 years. And I think that qualifies me for writing a book, but I'll tell you the story of the book if you want. It's a little longer story than that.
Okay, but so I imagine this scenario in my head. If I'm a kid and tell my mother and father, Mom, Dad, I want to become a writer as a profession, they will think that's crazy. So how do you ended up choosing that as a career?
That's so funny because indeed I came from a family where, I didn't even think you could be a writer. Nobody told me you could be a writer when you grew up, which is crazy because of course there's all, writers everywhere. The world wouldn't function without writers. So, how do you deal with that? I mean, I just let the proof be that I could succeed, and my parents just, let me go. I didn't come from a background where they had very much to say about me at all and what I was doing. But interestingly, and that's part of the story of the book, which was written with my partner, Jean-Benoit Nadeau, who is also a freelance journalist and has been for, a little longer than me, but let's say 3 decades. His father was an entrepreneur. He was one of the founder of one of the engineering firms. So he really understood like business and how to get business going, and all the ins and outs and taxes, and, teaching us to like get a credit line and take risks and invest and be able to go into debt sometimes. And all of those values, which, weren't part of where I came from, I got those through my father-in-law, and he was a great, great help to us. And I guess the reason that we, I can talk about how the book came about, but, the short answer is like, I wish I'd had a book like this when I was starting out. Luckily, I had someone in the background who could give me that kind of practical advice about all the aspects of being self-employed, of being an entrepreneur. But yes, so we decided to share that wisdom that we got, my partner and I, so everyone else can benefit from it.
Okay, but you have somehow understanding parents. Many kids nowadays trying to go to school and they decide to go into something else that their parents didn't plan for or didn't pay for, how would they if I tell my parents I want to be a dance teacher, which I am, I guess I left home when I was a young kid anyway, so I was rebellious. But many kids don't have that luxury. How this would be perhaps one of the biggest or first barriers into being a solopreneur. Breaking away from the social script that your parents tell you, you have to go to school and get a master, whatever, and go and work for the government or for a big corporation. And this is an idea that's been ingrained in us since we are little kids, and that's our well-meaning parents. They want the best for us, so that's what they think is the best that we can do with our life.
Yeah. Well, I think that people are have it in them if they want to be entrepreneurial or not. And my parents had the same idea: go to school, get a degree, get a job. But I remember my father saying when I was young, and he did pick it up, I think Julie's going to be in business someday. I remember him saying that. He didn't say it to me, he said it to one of my siblings. And indeed, it's sort of my second nature. But anywhere between 10 and 15% of the population is self-employed. I mean, if you look around, the world's not going to function with just employees. We need people starting things up. And when you're young, it's a great time to do this. It's a great time. You don't have responsibilities. Everyone has responsibilities, but before you have kids, before you have maybe a mortgage, when I started out, I had nothing to lose. And I think that's the best thing to tell your parents. I mean, there's only, one time in life when you really, truly have nothing to lose, which isn't to say that people shouldn't go strike out on their own when they're older. Plenty of people do. And they have, often some sort of professional background or baggage that they can bring in to get a self-employed career going. But when you're young, the best argument is it's now or never. I try it or I don't. I want to. Let's give it a shot. I don't think any parent should be worried about watching their child in the economy that we're in right now wanting to take risks. I mean, what do they say? You're going to change jobs anyway. 7 or 8 times you're going to change, careers in your career. So, why wouldn't being self-employed be part of that? And if you want to do it, you want to do it. People, right. I feel sad looking at people who have opted for security. Not everybody, obviously, but the people who've always kind of wanted to go out on their own. And I have a few in my life who always wanted to start something and always kind of wanted to do their own thing, and they stuck with a job for whatever reason. Sometimes very good, security. But it makes me feel a little bit sad. I think they should give it a shot. And parents have to understand that kids are going to do what they're going to do, and if they've got it in them, they've got it in them, and they'll never know unless they give it a try.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so then you are busy, you are writing articles, you are writing books, and then one day you decided, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to write a book about going solo. How that decision came about?
Well, actually, that's not how the book came about at all. The book is Jean-Benoit, my partner, who's usually sitting back there, my husband and writing partner. He wrote this book early in his career, very bold. He was in his late 20s. He published, I think, the first version of this book in French in Quebec in 1998. And he has sold steadily over the decades. I think he's sold 30,000 copies of it. It's a classic here in Quebec, in French-speaking Quebec. So the story of the book is that I decided, for years I've been saying we should translate it, but also adapt it for the English-Canadian market. And I put it off. We thought it was going to be complicated. I don't know why. And then during the pandemic, I had some time. Work was a bit slow. I needed some kind of focus. I needed a project that I could just dig into, that I didn't have to develop and find money for and so on. And so I just worked away at it, started translating it, a little bit each day. And by, a couple months, I'd worked my way through it. And then we decided to sell it in Canada. And we're also selling it in the United States. So the book, I don't know if you can put like the book that's here, this is the Canadian version with a little flag on the corner, and then we have a US version, same cover. No Flag. And so I wrote basically two books in one. They're two separate books, but the thing. So that's how it started. And we found a publisher in Toronto who's very enthusiastic about it, and off we go.
Okay, great. Okay, well, since you are an expert in the area, nowadays when we think of employment, of course, the default idea is getting a job at some kind of corporation or for the government, but it hasn't always been that way. And one time in history, everyone was a solopreneur. Can you take us back in history and tell us how it was then? And how is it that now we are, well, not necessarily stuck, but then we are into this new reality?
Yeah, well, we start the book off to talking about being self-employed as the oldest profession in the world. People joke about the oldest profession of the world, but for us, it's this, and it's just a fact of history that once upon a time we were foragers and everybody was on their own. It's funny because I write for Gestion magazine, which is a management magazine at HEC in Montreal, and I do interviews with authors there on books for management. And a recent one was actually about this topic, about the skills. It's called, I'm looking at a bookshelf, Tomorrowland, and it's about the skills that we developed in our, as human beings, the sort of foraging, exploring skills that we developed in our early prehistory, and how those skills have not been useful in a corporate world and in an industrial world. And so with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, when workers go from doing their own thing on farms, because farmers are entrepreneurs, all of a sudden they go into factories, and all of the skills that are the impulses that we have that are natural to explore and to get out there and to find things and take risks and so on, have no place. And in this author's opinion, it's a problem, and we need to value those skills again, even within the workforce. But of course, we've drawn those skills. You're a solopreneur yourself. Like, we draw on those skills all the time. We have to be on the lookout all the time for new things. We have to be attuned to what's going on and how the environment is changing, so we can alter, our services and what we do and how we work and who we work with as things change and evolve. So, the book is like all of the practical advice and skills that you need to be able to do all that stuff, because honestly, we're not raised to learn how to make a business plan. We're taught how to make a CV, but not how to make a business plan. And to network, to find clients, to everything from to get your own GST, HST number, and so on. All of that stuff, someone needs to explain how to do it. And so that's what we wrote the book for.
And tell me, what comes first, the decision to become a solopreneur and then looking for an idea, or an idea and then finding out that the best way to implement that idea is to be working solo?
That's a good question. And I can't really answer that. I mean, I think that there are people who profoundly want to work on their own and go look for an idea. And then I think there are people who have an idea and decide to, quit their job or develop. I think the important thing, and we talk about this in the first part of the book, the book has 4 sections. So sort of preparing, research and preparing, which is where you develop your idea. The selling ideas, negotiating and getting over the hurdles that you have to selling and so on. Operations, sort of how to run the business, taxes, contracts, all that sort of stuff. And then management, which is, final sort of area that you have to, bookkeeping and all that kind of thing. So I lost my train of thought.
Okay, well, you were describing the book has 4 sections.
Yes. You were asking me
what comes first?
Yes, okay, right. So I think that the idea for anything to work, your idea has to be good. Like, it has to be a decent idea, no matter what. If you come up with an idea or if you're idea driven. So we do have, a specific chapter on evaluating how good your idea. It has to be interesting. And I realize, like, a lot of people will start out and maybe not have an idea that's super interesting, but it has to become over time. You have to keep working on your ideas. So it always has to be something that sets yourself out a little bit, sets yourself apart a little bit. And that's so different in so many fields. It's a little hard to generalize about it. My distinct characteristic as a writer, and what is part of what I guess we would call my branding, is that I'm really bilingual and I work in both languages. And so and I write very high quality magazine writing. So people can come to me, and that's all of my work right now. People can come to me when they need high quality writing in one language or the other. I work with a partner who's a native French speaker. As a small business, we can always provide those kinds of things. And that's what sets us apart. But we do have, do you want me to read it? We do have a list of all the criteria. Let's see, all the questions you need to test an idea.
Okay, yes, please.
Okay. Is the potential market small or large? Is it a physical or virtual market, local or foreign? These are all the things you have to think about. Is the market growing or shrinking? Very pertinent question for writers. It's grown and shrunk and grown and shrunk, and it's changed a lot. What's the expected lifespan of this product? Is it something you want to do that's quick and out there, or is it something you want to develop over time? Will it become outdated quickly? Another good question. Will I be able to develop other products or services based on this idea? So for writing, it's a good one. Like, you certainly can. Is my idea revolutionary? And there's a lot of good stories of very revolutionary ideas. Doesn't have to be revolutionary, but it has to be interesting. Will my customer require special training to be able to use my product? I mean, I go on and on. What the economic, emotional, and human needs will it fulfill? Do competing ideas exist already on the market? Should my advertising be aimed at a few or a lot of people? Will I need an elaborate distribution network? An important question. Will I have to comply with standards and obtain permits? Of course, that applies in many professions. What are the shortcomings of similar ideas on the market? And how many people can benefit from this idea before it loses its value? So those things apply to all businesses, and maybe more businesses, small businesses than solopreneurs, but they're things that you have to think about when you're starting out. And we have a whole chapter on how to sort of figure out if your idea is interesting, if it's good.
Wow. Okay. I think my idea is a horrible idea. I decided to become a photographer. And if you Google photographer Montreal, there are actually over 1 million results. Yeah. So how to stand out on that is just a Herculean task. Yeah. Nevertheless, I think I have survived because I've been struggling to become a photographer for over 5 years. And after 5 years, I guess I get to know people, this and that. But, I have given myself a long runway to get started into this, and not a lot of people have that luxury. So I think those are some of the first barriers that people encounter. Like, if you get a job, next day you have almost everything set up. But if you decide to be a writer like yourself, the runway that you need is a long runway. So I don't know, can you give us some ideas of how we deal with that? Someone coming from nowhere, starting something new in it seems like almost every market is a crowded market, and how to eventually carve a little piece of the pie for yourself.
But, and then just if I can respond immediately to your career, which I know a little bit about, I mean, you're very active, you network a lot, you're very active in the community, you have a specialization for a specific kind of photography. There's a constant need for it. You're constantly plugged into who's having a book launch or a party, so, I mean, you found exactly what makes your business work, I think. I don't know, in a way, you're a better person to answer the question than I am, because you probably spent some time experimenting with different kinds of photography in order to find what works for you. You're very personable, right? You're very friendly with people. So you chose a profession that, suited that, and even a way of being that kind of professional that really suits somebody who's really gregarious and likes to be in a crowd and.
Right. But my first year as a photographer, I had 4 gigs. Like, that's enough for any aspiring photographer to say, oh, this doesn't work. And then the following year, I probably have like 10. So
Yeah.
that's even, it's still improvement, but someone can get deflated almost immediately. And I bring it back to you as a journalist to start saying, okay, who's gonna buy my next article as a first year out of school journalist? That's
Yeah.
a huge barrier.
Well, the market's changed a lot. There are a lot of places to write. So there's a lot, and there's a really big market. It's not the difficulty is learning about the market, doing your research and finding out where those areas are. But I would say to people in general, whether it's a creative business or another kind of business, you do need to factor in some kind of cushion. If you are starting your job, if you want to start out and you have a good job, and you should probably keep it until you've gotten things rolling. If you don't, people leave their jobs sometimes with a package, sometimes with unemployment, and use that time to get going. Some people have a spouse who has a good income, and that works really well. I mean, that's what being in a partnership with somebody is about. If they desperately want to go out on their own, and they have a partner who can cover the bills for a certain amount of time, I think that's work. Some people use credit. I mean businesses do. Businesses to start out, they have to have a certain amount of credit or capital ahead of them to get through the first years. It's true for every kind of business. You need that time to get up and get going. But what I would say to people so that they don't get discouraged is to, and I don't know if you did this, but like to set specific goals. So when I started out, it sounds crazy now, but I just wanted to earn $1,000 a month, like that, and I could live on that at the time. Honestly, I could. And I thought, if I pitched and pitched, a lot of the early energy in your career is going to be going into pitching ideas and reaching out to customers and networking and finding places for whatever you're selling. And I pitched and pitched and pitched and managed within that to meet my goal, which was modest, but it was enough to get established and build on that. And then, in my next years, that doubled and tripled and so on. And then, I got up and running, earning a decent living in, a couple of years, I would say. Sounds like a lot, but it's like going to school. It's an investment that you have to make. You're not going to walk into an up and running, great business. But with time, what's great is that it belongs to me. Nobody can fire me. Nobody can take away the 30 years of experience that I have now built up as a writer. Some years were good, some years were bad. Like, it's not all smooth after, even when you get established, but nobody can take that away from me. And it's mine to build on and mine to use going forward. And, I'm not planning on retiring anytime soon. So I hope that's inspiring. But
Yes. Well, I do like the response that you gave, that a person has to have some kind of cushion, because an advice that I hear often in some entrepreneur workshop is that jump off the cliff and the wings will grow on your way down. And no, I think that's a great way to crash and kill yourself. So, if you have some kind of cushion and you manage your expectations and see kind of like a growth trajectory that will happen gradually, not from one day to the other, I think that will give a person the biggest chance of success. So yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah, I think everybody has to factor that in. Everybody has to be realistic, and it's work.
Okay, well, can you tell us of some of the advantages of being our own boss? I mean, when we are an employee, we have to, I don't know, do what our boss tells us, but going solo has the great advantage that you are your own boss. Can you just excel us on the idea of being solo?
Sure. Well, it comes at a price. We all know that when you're working on your own, you are your everything, right? You are the accountant, the bookkeeper, people, you do your taxes, you do your marketing, you do your, web stuff, and there's a lot of work. So it's not a walk in the park. However, one of the greatest things about being being self-employed, for me, has been the freedom. And people idealize it a little bit, being a writer, being free. For you too, I'm sure people say the same thing, being a photographer and all that freedom. But I would say to them, people who are starting out, that it is a really great advantage. It does, the ability to be flexible and do what you want and pursue the projects that you want to do when you want to do them is great. Of course, you have to work to make sure the projects get off the ground, but you got to use that freedom, in my opinion. Like, it's not really worth, to be honest, being self-employed unless you take advantage of the freedoms that it gives you. So in our case, very early in our work, we've been working together, as I said, for 30 years. Very early, we decided that we wanted to travel and we wanted to use our freedom to be able to live in different countries and have those experiences. And again, I don't want to make it sound like it's easier than it is. It's not an easy thing to pull off, but we have that ability and we've done it. We moved to France for 3 years early in our career, in 1999, which was the beginning of our book career. We wrote our first big book together, 60 Million Frenchmen Can't Be Wrong. And then we, we had no fixed address for a little while in our lives before we had kids. We were writing our second book and traveling and, working all the time, but of course, traveling across the French-speaking world to write our second book. And then when we had kids, we kept going. When the kids were little, we were able to, I got a fellowship to work on a third book on language in the United States. And we took the kids out of school and moved them to the United States for 6 months. And that was a great experience and, a great experience for them. And then we did it again in France again, when my kids were about 10, we decided to go back to Paris for a year. And, there's other ways of doing that. University professors get their sabbaticals, but we can do it and we take advantage of it and we do it on our own terms, taking our own risks with our own, credit card, but we take advantage of it and that makes it worth it. And that's the biggest, for me, it's like by far the biggest gratifying element of being self-employed is just having the ability to do the projects when I want to do them.
Okay, so there is a contradiction in being self-employed, in us that the greatest thing of being self-employed is that you don't have a boss. But one of the biggest impediment of being self-employed is that you don't have a boss to tell you what to do. And I explain myself. I have seen people who work until midnight to do a report that their boss want them to present the next morning, right? And they do all these sacrifices for their boss. But when it comes to working on a plan for themselves, they say, oh, I'll do it later. I don't have a boss to tell me when I have to submit and this I'll do it later. It seems like they don't get over that, and then they have to get a job because they don't have a boss to tell them what to do.
Yeah. Well, I don't know quite what to say to that. I mean, if you don't have, being self-employed does require a certain amount of discipline, which is why I say people like to kind of idealize the freedom, but it really does require a certain amount of discipline. And, if people knew, I mean, I've just spoken about all this freedom we took advantage of, but my day-to-day life is pretty routine in a way. Like there's things I have to get done. I have to do, bookkeeping and billing and I have to take care of things on the website and do promotion. I was speaking with a writing colleague yesterday and about how much promotion is part of the book selling business, being a writer. Sometimes a quarter of my week is spent on that. And, you got to have a certain amount of structure and be organized. And again, that's one of the reasons that we wrote the book. I mean, it explains how you need to set up your life, basically. And, we work on a regular schedule. I don't take days off very much. I take weekends off systematically. I take holidays, but basically I work 9 to 5 like everybody else. And I'm my boss, and my boss gets me out of bed and gets me working. I mean, I know that I have to get those things done. And to be honest, a lot of people who make it as a self-employed person are, pretty naturally organized anyway.
Okay. Well, the last question. The last question is, where do we find your book? But before we get that, is there anything that I neglected to ask you that I should have asked you?
Let's see. We talked about why ideas are good. Oh, we didn't talk about the problem of isolation in the home.
Yeah, how do we do? I mean, you have a husband who works next to you, but I mean, most of us, like I don't have a wife next to me. So how do we deal with that, the isolation of working by yourself?
Well, even if I have, a partner here, it is a solitary job, what I do. And I just wanted to say, and it's again something we talk about in the book, it's really important when you're starting out. It's really important for your whole self-employed career not to live in a little bubble and be cut off from things. I network a lot. I wouldn't say I'm as naturally gregarious probably as you are, but I make an effort to go to meetings and get involved with things. I was president of the Quebec Writers Federation for 2 years, and I was on the board, and I like being involved with organizing activities and writer advocacy and things like that. Like, find whatever gets you out meeting other people in your field. I think it's really important to feel connected. And there is a fair amount that happens online. Obviously, groups meet online, but I still don't think it's the same as getting out and shaking hands with people and drinking coffee or drinking beer or whatever you want to do with people. I think it's really important, and I think it's one of the things that makes it possible to last over the long term as someone who's self-employed. Of course, some self-employed people are going to be in contact with people in the public all the time. It's not just creative fields. I may have a friend who's a self-employed ombuds person who's constantly in touch with people, but nevertheless, even she like networks and gets out and gets involved in things outside of the house. We need that outside energy to feed us. We can't just like be in our heads all the time and be working on our own all the time. So that I was hoping to talk about. That's about it.
Okay. Well, then the last question, where do we find your book?
You can find my book online, or I think Paragraph Books in Montreal, for if people are listening in Montreal. I'm pretty sure Paragraph Books will have copies. You can get it at Indigo or on Amazon. Those are the two for the Canadians, and for the Americans, it's Barnes and Noble and Amazon. And last time I checked, they still had copies in stock. So yeah.
Well, Julie, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure speaking, and we'll see each other again, I think.